About values in community psychology, and in today's lecture we're going to be talking about the first value, which is individual and family wellness. So these are some of the values that have been outlined by Dalton and Clues in their book. Let's move to the first value, which is individual and family wellness. To begin with, individual and family wellness. First, let's talk about wellness. Now, community psychology adopts the definition of WHO, where defining health is concerned, which is that health is complete social, mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well being, and not just absence of diseases and distress. So, indicators of well being, some of the indicators that an individual or a family or a collective is doing well would be that the members of the community are likely to have absence of symptoms of psychological distress. And not only not having any symptoms does not become wellness, as you can understand, but also having certain positive qualities such as resilience, social emotional skills, personal well being, and life satisfaction. Um, so if a community, if an individual, if a group, if a collective have these qualities, we would call that the community has is experiencing well-being. Now, some of these indicators of well-being are also the goals and outcomes and objectives of community intervention projects. So many community intervention projects, directly or as a byproduct, want to influence the well-being of individuals and the collective. Now, an important thing to understand over here is that strengthening family wellness can lead to individual wellness. Now, if you take clinical psychology, then clinical psychology comes from a perspective wherein I am trying to influence the well being of a particular individual. Now, I have found a major problem. I and many other, I think, people who eventually moved on to community psychology because of the narrowness of in clinical psychology felt that ensuring individual wellness does not sustain the well being of the individual, because at the end of the day, the individual is embedded in a context. And to begin with, the first context that surrounds the individual, if you take the different levels of analysis, is the family. So let's say there are very patriarchal sexist attitudes that a family member has. Let's say the father holds very sexist attitudes that the girl is supposed to be wearing this, the girl is supposed to get married by 23 years of age, 22 years of age, whatever age, the girl is not supposed to go to college. If she's going to college, then she should only go and then come back on time. She should not have any male friends, etc., etc., etc. So in this particular setup, if a person if an individual experiences a lot of psychological distress, so merely counseling the individual will not be a solution to a problem, or I would say it would not be a sustainable solution to the problem. We need to work on the wellness of the collective, we need to work on the wellness of the community, the family, the group that we are talking about, because working on changing the attitudes at a community level, at a family level, at a group level, will ensure is like more likely to ensure the well-being of this particular individual. Now, take the example of Neha that we discussed in the previous lecture. Now, um, now about Neha, Neha was an Indian girl, born and brought up in USA, where she was experiencing the clash of values between the interdependency in the Indian context and the independence that is valued in the American context. Now, counseling her from an American context would be ignoring the fact that her well being, especially people coming from collectivistic cultures, because their sense of self is defined in terms of the group that they're part of. So their well-being is so their autonomy or the individual autonomy cannot be understood in the absence of complete absence of the context. So even if you tell, you're counseling her that okay, you should move out of your home, you should stay on your own, which probably something that would be probably normal and acceptable in a Western culture, will be a huge taboo in the Indian culture. And also because of this, because the fact that she has been raised with these clash of values, she will also not be very happy leaving her family behind and adopting autonomy in an American format. So Neha's well-being depends on the family's well-being, and family's well-being, I'm sure, also depends on Neha's well-being. Now, like I was discussing previously, right now, that individual and family wellness has also been the focus of clinical psychology. Then, what is it that community psychology does differently from your clinical psychology? And what it does is that community psychology complements the clinical methods, because clinical methods are coming from individualistic approach, and community psychology's methods are coming from the ecological levels of analysis approach. So you will find a community psychologist, when they're working on improving the well-being of collectives, groups, and individuals, they are likely to adopt something like prevention approach, prevention of maladaptive behavior, personal and family problems, and illness. So developing an intervention program in a community slum, let's say they'll take a slum community where there is widespread prevalence of abuse of substances such as whiteners among children, or such as alcohol amongst other adults. So curative would of course be to provide these people who are now addicted to these substances help to detoxify and de-addiction processes to be put in place. But if I know that this particular community has significantly higher rates of addiction than other communities, then a community psychologist is likely to present or adopt or implement a preventive approach, or a preventive program for this particular problem. And many slums, in fact, just a side note over here, lots of slums, low socioeconomic areas that are crowded by people belonging to the low socioeconomic classes in our society, I think, I mean, in my experience, if you interview them for the mental health problems, there are many there, but the prominent one is, of course, substance use. Then promotion of social emotional competence and of health. So again, prevention of maladaptive behavior, promotion of healthy behavior. So so healthy behavior could probably be something like going to school, regular attendance to school. How do we prevent kids from dropping out of school, to go to school, to study hard, to be hardworking, and to not fall, for uh, do not fall for delinquent processes, do not fall for straying away from the, or do not fall for basically antisocial behavior. Next, social networks and mutual help groups, developing intervention programs in non-clinical settings such as schools and workplaces and other such similar organization. And then finally, advocacy for changes in social services, laws, policies, and programs to promote mental and physical health. Now, one such very popular change in the Indian laws that happened last year, was this: the abolition of the triple talaq law. Now, some of you have heard a lot of arguments in this regard, but for those of you who are not aware about this, then basically, triple talaq means that a Muslim man can divorce his wife by saying these three words thrice: talaq, talaq, talaq. This was abolished by the politicians in India, and it was made a criminal offense. Criminal offense means that any Muslim man, if he pronounces triple talaq for his wife to divorce her, is going to end up in jail. Now, many of you may find that to be a very, this is good, that this is protecting women's rights. However, this is not protecting women's right for one reason, which is what has been highlighted in this article, which is also what I personally agree with, which is that no other religion in India, as far as I understand, you could contradict me if I'm wrong over here, but no other religion in India makes abandonment of wives a criminal offense. It may be a civil offense, and as it should have been over here, because the reason I'm going to mention right now. But it is not supposed to be a criminal offense, because at the end of the day, if your husband is in the jail, and considering that many women, Muslim women in India, in fact there have been reports that say that Muslim women in India score lowest amongst all the well-being statistics and indicators. Even they even fall below Dalit women in our country. So if the husband then ends up in jail, who's going to earn? Who's going to provide food for her children? Who she's basically going to starve, and she and her children's well-being is actually in a more precarious position right now than ever before. So you can read this line here: if former husbands are jailed, it could prevent them from paying post-divorce maintenance and divest wives and children of financial security. In turn, it could leave families at the mercy of hostile, vengeful, and matrimonial families. So, questioning the government's motive, they declare the law not pro women but anti minority. So, please think about it, that even when we tend to make certain changes in laws, which we feel are going to benefit people, are going to benefit families, it's not. It is probably again, research can these are opinion articles, but then research can find out the extent to which abolition of triple talaq has led to increased or decreased well-being of families and women. Now, coming to here, an example. So, yeah, before I go further, when you write your answers in an examination, again, try to explain, try to use a case study to exemplify each of these values. Especially, I think we've done many case studies by now, especially as part of Unit 3 and Unit 4. So you can pick up an example from those case studies, and then especially where you found, let's say this is, I can see empowerment over here, I can see social justice as a value over here. So for instance, family and wellness, for me, I could see it in the community-based rehabilitation project by published by Dalal. So in this, you'll find that the disability certificate camps, medical camps were set up so that physically challenged individuals could attain your disability certificates, and on the basis of disability certificates, some of the people were able to even get loans from the bank to start their own businesses. And this thing not only led to independence and autonomy and financial standing financial independence for the person who's physically challenged, but also of the entire family. Okay, similarly, when you in this particular article itself, focus group discussions on the topic that what can disabled people do. It included deliberations from both the members, physically challenged people themselves, and the families. So if you this kind of a project, which is again coming from community approach to family and wellness, is not only focusing on the health well-being of the physically challenged people, but also focusing on interventions that can have percolating effects for other family members as well. Now, finally, the last concept of collective wellness. Now, collective wellness refers to health of communities and societies. Now, to this end, I can think of a lot of articles that I've read recently about, Kashmir's mental health, or mental health of people belonging to Kashmir, especially in the last 3-4 months. Uh, Go ahead, go online, read about all of these researches that have been published, that Kashmir in general has been ravaged by militancy, ravaged by our I would say it's been a conflict torn area since many years now. And mental health of people who live in conflict torn areas has always been attacked, has always reduced, has always been vulnerable, which has also been the case with Kashmir. But in the last 4-5 months, especially, doctors, medical health professionals actually, they have been they have discussed and they have shared a rise in cases, many cases of especially something like post traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression amongst the Kashmiris. So there have been rise in the number of cases presenting themselves with mental health issues, and this is linked to the political instability of the entire region. So in this context, counseling one Kashmiri sitting face to face, one on one, is again the perspective coming from the traditional psychology, individualistic psychology, is highly limited. You have to understand the community, you have to understand the other levels, that ecological levels at play, which are ultimately affecting the group's well-being. So therefore, collective wellness, or improving the wellness of a group, will is something that is a value for community psychology. So this is about family and individual wellness.